In this week's episode of the Tales from the C-Suite podcast, I got to spend time with Matt Toms, the Chief Executive Officer of Voya Investment Management. Matt was born and raised in Detroit before going to the University of Michigan in the Ross School of Business. Matt started his career at Lincoln Financial and spent 6 years there before joining Northern Trust. Following his time at Northern Trust, Matt spent 2 years at Calamos Investments before joining Voya Financial in 2009. In his 16 years at Voya, Matt has served in a number of different roles. He started as the head of public fixed income before stepping into the CIO role of fixed income in 2016. In 2020, Matt was selected to be part of an executive succession development program that my firm designed and delivered in partnership with Voya Financial. Matt was part of the first wave of 15 to 20 executives that went through our assessment and feedback process. It was at this time that I started working with Matt as his executive coach. Over the next 5 years, we worked together as he took on increased scale and scope for the organization. In 2022, he was promoted to VIM's Global CIO before stepping into the CEO role in January 2024. Today, Matt leads a highly motivated and engaged team responsible for all aspects of running the $360 million diversified asset management business. Matt has been married to his wife, Kerry, for 26 years and has 2 children. When he is not busy with work, Matt is an avid golfer and loves music and travel. One of the ways you can support this channel is to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This tremendously helps with the YouTube algorithms to get the Tales from the C-Suite podcast broader exposure to leaders from all walks of life. I would greatly appreciate your help in supporting the growth of our channel. Thank you for your support and welcome to the show. Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Tales from the C-Suite podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Adam Bandelli. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Matt Toms, the Chief Executive Officer of Voya Investment Management. Matt and I have known each other for almost 8 or 9 years now. I started working with him when he was a CIO, before he was president-elect and now president. So very excited to get some lessons learned from your career, your journey, Matt. But how are you? How are things?
Things are great. I'm always busy, but the family's good. The business is running well.
Before we jump into some of the things you're doing today, I wanted to go back to childhood. I'm a firm believer that the events that shape us from early age on show up in our leadership today. So if we could go back and if your life was a book, you were writing the first chapter, what would that be about?
So first chapter would be based in Detroit and then grew up in a suburb outside of that. I think back, I grew up as a working class family. It was a tight-knit family and spent a lot of time with my dad doing normal kid things. So I was very active in sports. Dad worked, but he made sure to have time on the weekends. So he was baseball coach, swimming coach. I swam my entire youth out. A drummer, playing in bands. And so he was always active and always engaged. But I remember one story, it's kind of funny. My dad usually was our coach, but he was an umpire for a baseball game. And I just remember him saying, don't expect any preferential call. And then I remember being called out on a third strike that I think brushed my jersey. He says it didn't. I'm convinced it brushed my jersey. It was so far inside. So it was more of a go earn it. You're not going to be gifted a whole lot. Make it happen. Working class Detroit family background. But look, I think that taught me to engage as well, to enjoy it, to be active, but also better make it happen. Not a lot going to be gifted to you.
What other values and beliefs did him and your mother instill in you that kind of transfer over to your leadership today?
When I think back again, strong, close-knit family, myself, a brother, sister, mom and dad both worked a working class background, valued hard work. My dad was a high school graduate, member of the Marines, and his father was a Detroit police officer. And both my mom and my dad came from families of 8 siblings. And so there was these massive networks, and mostly my dad's family that was in the Michigan area. But there was always aunts and uncles around, and there was a very diverse array of people. You don't really appreciate it at the time. What are you growing up? It's just your own normal. But it was a tight-knit family, always working. Everyone had their objectives and commitments. But I was also exposed to this broad array of other adults that were finding their own way, and the aunts and uncles, the nieces and nephews. And it was that difference, that kaleidoscope of influences that I didn't really appreciate then. In my upbringing, there's no one way. It's no, you do it this way. So I can see this very interesting, eclectic group doing it in many different ways. So that was both rich, rewarding, challenging, because there wasn't one answer to things. How do you figure out how to adapt into different situations or environments? I think that helped me as far as early influences, but ultimately that value of hard work, honesty, accountability, and, a dangerous word for me is entitled, honestly. I'm not sure most of us are entitled to anything. For my upbringing, it was you'll have plenty of opportunity, but go get it, go earn it, make it happen.
You raise a really good point about having a number of different, I guess you can call it cooks in the kitchen, or people who, impacted your life. We talked about in our coaching work a couple of years ago, just going from someone who is the buck stops with you and you're doing a lot of the work yourself to someone who's a leader of leaders and really influencing, inspiring your people. What did those early life lessons teach you now as a CEO?
So it's interesting. In some ways, they can be incredibly impactful the way that I felt about it. I was accountable to my family, who gave me a lot of opportunities, who worked hard for the opportunities that I had and worked hard to stay engaged in my life. It created a sense of accountability to them, but also an accountability to myself to make the most of it. So when I trace it all the way back, I actually think it helps me with the drive and the conviction and the belief in delivering, but it can also be, to a certain extent, a trap, because you can have a mentality of, I need to just outwork this problem. Have you tried rubbing some more dirt on it, right? Grit solves everything. And that works for a long time in your career. And I share with a lot of people, make sure that when you show up for your first day of work, a couple things. A, outwork everyone else. You're going to get a lot further. And B, remember, you're being paid for your experience. But no one really tells you, hey, by the way, stop now, just outwork everything and change and figure out how to lead people and help them, because you're so wired to just run up the hill, take it. On some level, you have to pause, reflect, and fight against evolution and your own kind of cultivation and your environment to say, no, it's time for me to pause and actually think about trust, inspire, leader, these different things that can feel like soft touch things, but you need to embrace. So I think it's double. It can really help you, but it can actually become hard to break to a certain extent. And the I can do it alone mentality can be too pervasive.
That's a great point you're raising. When you think about your first year in the CEO role, Matt, was that the hardest lesson to learn? What were some of the things that you anticipated going in and having to deal with, and it was completely opposite?
So I was fortunate that I broke that mentality over a few years before being in the CEO seat. And so as I progressed from individual contributors throughout my career and the many ups and downs I was in the chief investment officer position, and growing in that role, it became much more about, are you developing talent? And it took me some time and had a difficult journey from hearing, we want you to do more as CIO, as opposed to, we want you to do different. We want to evolve enterprise level leadership. And so if not ready for that when entering the CEO role, I think it would be incredibly hard to succeed, because you'd be entering not knowing or not having made the personal leap from a being told what to do versus believing it and feeling it every day. Because in the C-suite, you can't pretend. You have to be your honest self and embrace who you are. And so the journey before the C-suite as CIO helped me understand that I needed to think differently about what success meant. As a motivated person, define success carefully. And success was empowering people, developing people, putting people in a position to win. So when I arrived in the CEO job, it was much more about how quickly, and this is the real challenge, how quickly can you set the agenda? How quickly can you learn about your people? How quickly can you have the vision, the strategy, and then the execution plan, and get people aligned to it? And that's the real challenge, because that takes time. And in the prior role, when you're an individual contributor, even a balanced role, it can be show up smart today. Just show up with your experience and intellect and go win today for your client. There's a subtle difference between put people in a position to win, and it just takes time. And that's the biggest lesson for the early days. I view it as, can you get to the front of that wave? And it's so hard the first 100 days as you're swimming as fast as possible to get there.
It makes a great point. I think one of the big things I see a lot of times, you look at SVPs going to EVP or into the C-suite, there is this tendency to almost feel guilt, where you were the subject matter expert and you did a lot of the heavy lifting. And now you have to build that trust with your people, even if it's things that, fall in your wheelhouses. Can you get those things done with and through others? And so I think you're spot on that being able to really see the mountain, be able to pull those things together and set that vision is really, really important.
Critical, absolutely critical. And that takes the form of setting the right agenda a month forward, having the right strategy meeting a month forward, a week forward, or knowing for the week ahead, have you done the prep work, because you're the one guiding the conversation as opposed to just trying to show up smart. It takes time, it's intimidating, and there's also ample scope for imposter syndrome, because you typically don't show up in the C-suite fully formed. You might have exposure to a lot, but you're not the expert. I was never the distribution lead. I was never the product lead. I was the investment team lead. And so you show up with partial knowledge and you realize very quickly, even if you wanted to be everything, you can't. And the inclination to win by just working harder and knowing everything is self-defeating. It's that building bridges, it's cultivating that talent, but then it's getting it aligned together as quickly as possible. And that's why I think that 100-day took me a little longer than 100, I'd argue, but you need that time because otherwise you're really disarmed. You're not in control of what you're trying to guide.
So you raise a great point. You mentioned enterprise leadership. There is the team that you lead, and there's a team that you sit on as part of a C-suite leader. What were some of your biggest lessons learned being part of that team, interacting with the board and some of those dynamics?
Enterprise level leadership versus team leadership, very different, right? Because you're ultimately responsible for a broader array of professionals and leaders of leaders, and you can't be the subject matter expert. So it has to be really back to, and this sounds like a consulting book, but that's where the vision that you can inspire matters. And then the strategy to achieve that vision, right? That the vision without a strategy is an hallucination. So what is that? Getting buy-in around it, because suddenly this becomes very tactile with your enterprise. Here's my vision. How are we going to get there? Do you agree or disagree with the vision? Is a very different conversation towards a 3 to 5 year goal than is, hey, I won for our client today. Now, the vision and the strategy better darn well include this is how the client's going to win. And if it doesn't, then you've got a whole nother problem. But it's much more about setting up the team and the client alignment over a multi-year journey. And so you really do need those tools because otherwise you don't have something that aggregates your business strategy towards that vision. And then, hey, I'm executing, but towards what end? You could be executing, doing great over a short window, but it needs to survive longer. So I really think the frame versus I won today, how are clients faring today is how your KPI and an individual contributor, even a high level individual contributor. When you get to the enterprise level, it has to be through that broader lens. And then for the external constituencies, there's a whole nother array of relationships. So what you realize, it's not how are you doing with the board? That's the first conversation. It's, yeah, I think the board buys in or the board's pushing me. But then it's really, how are you doing with the 12 board members? Do you understand their individual perceptions, their own position in the board, that interpersonal awareness of what they're trying to accomplish in the board and what power or influence they're trying to have? It's not a monolith. It's a sum of people. So I think that's where it's something you and I have talked about a lot. In this role, the relational intelligence begins to matter a lot. How are you building relationships, interfacing with people to get to know their motivations at the C-suite matters, and it matters really quickly with the board who doesn't want to be treated like a board. They want to be treated like board members.
Yeah, that's a great point. Going back to childhood, you mentioned the extended family could be there or even outside the family. Were there mentors, coaches, people that sewed into your life, whether it was through sports or music at early age, middle school, high school years?
Yeah, my dad was a big one, and he was just so prevalent in our sports. My mom as well. I was a very competitive swimmer, and they'd announce the meets, scorekeep the meets, or coach the games. And then there's the sporting coaches that would really drive you. And what I realized is, and I don't come up with a whole lot more than the people that were really good at getting me going helped me identify a goal. Because I was very goal oriented. People often say it's great set achievable goals. Just be careful what they are. And when I had someone who could say, you can get this drive and create that in me, I could run through walls. You have to be really careful to make sure that those goals are aligned. But I think it was family for me. It was coaches for me. And early in my career, I grew to key individuals. Really, I think I benefit from a broad array of people. And then as you get into college, it was less the individuals. It was more just the breadth of people. You're like, holy cow, I'm not just learning from a person here or there. People would hear the same curriculum as you and come away with different thoughts. You're like, wow, this world's amazing because I'm in this place where there's so many influences. So I don't really pinpoint to one or two people, but I think I really benefited from the broad array.
So you raise a really good point too, doing the swimming, also baseball. I was a team sports, played basketball, high school and college. My wife is an individual. She played Division II tennis. So the mindset of being an individual athlete versus a team athlete, were there things you learned from being able to do both? I know we're both avid golfers today. They're part of that individual component as well. And I think being exposed to both really can help you.
I agree. Avid, but that doesn't always mean good golfer, but I guess that comes and goes. I spent the most time in a pool with goggles on and my head face down, right? And 3 miles a day day, there's not a lot of fanfare to that. And there's something about the commitment and the drive and the internal conversation. It doesn't only exist in individual sports, but when you realize you're in control of that, the golf ball's not moving. You're the only thing moving. Why the heck is it so hard? That your mind over matter, how do you use your intellect to sometimes turn off things that are trying to create control? So I do think that sport mindset, the individual sports can really drive that want to. And then in team sports, when you're playing baseball, if you're a catcher or pitcher or whatever, I was not as good at basketball as I wanted to be. A mentality of I'm there for my teammate. To me, it always felt like that was the extra. How do I interface? How to do with them? But I'll be honest, one of the sayings I learned too late in life is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I was wired as a fast alone guy. Go, 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 go. I'm part of a team, but how great can I be? And it took me some time to learn that you're winning as a team element. So I tend to do a bit better in individual sports.
Was that an inflection point at some point in your career, Matt, where you had that realization? What was the process for you coming to that understanding?
Yeah, I think that was in the second half of my career to where ultimately one of the great things about the investment management business is, and this goes all the way back to my upbringing in school, is you're paid to learn every day. At heart, I'm a researcher and you get to paid for understanding how the world works. What a great job. It's competitive, but ultimately that idea of being paid for learning is something that I found very rewarding. And that didn't feel like work to me. And so always being in that position to where I was aligned with what I was interested in and outcome that could be rewarding for me, I found very intriguing.
I know you have two sons. You look at them going into the workforce next 5, 7 years. This idea of wanting to learn AI is changing all that. Do you have concerns for the investment management sector and people who were growing up like you that had to crunch numbers and be involved in the details? That's not going to be needed now. It's not going to be needed more in the future. Any thoughts on what impact that's going to have?
Yeah, I do a lot. I also am a big believer that you reach these inflection points to where the individual contributor versus the need to be a team contributor. You make those adjustments in that leap, and the world needs the team leaders. It needs the people who have the realization that, yeah, I'll contribute individually, but then it starts to grow, but as a team, and you learn from your team, both in school and in business. And so my concern starts even earlier to where you need to make sure you're learning in a team environment. I was never a huge fan of fully remote work. I like flexibility. That's fantastic. But people in the office learning from each other, the human experience, the emotional connections that are created, I think there's something there. And to the extreme of too much AI, too much data oriented, as everyone says, you can chop up the first couple rungs to the ladder. And the problem is you won't have leaders who are finding out how to become that leader of the first team to where it's 50% me, 50% team, which happened about halfway through my career. So I am concerned. I ultimately am a big believer that we all live in a world that would have been unfathomable 50 years ago. And
Yeah.
you just need to embrace that. And we can't fear it any more than someone who has dropped into our ecosystem from 200 years ago would say, what the heck is this? You embrace that. And what it does is it actually takes some rote memory. It takes what knowledge can you pull up and it makes it freely available, but not that much difference than did you learn algebra? Did you learn chemistry? Did you need to? Well, there's an intellectual understanding of the background, which I think will still be needed. And I think the skill sets of the future can build upon the fast recall. But if you don't have that fundamental understanding, you'll be at a weakness. So what I encode with my kids is learn to use the tools. Then on top of the tool, outwork everybody else. Because people are going to think the data retrieval
Yep.
or the construct is the answer. That's not it. That's free. Your work starts then. Your work starts with understanding Adam if you're working with him, understanding your clients. So interpersonal skills, actually, in a world that's becoming more intermediated in the 2D space, interpersonal skills should skyrocket in value, where that authentic connectivity matter even more because just the data becomes almost ubiquitous.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing in my space too, that the need to get people in the same room. And COVID really exacerbated this, that there's a whole difference being in the room with your team and being able to problem solve together, the water cooler conversations that you miss when you're not. And so I think that will become a stronger need as we get more into AI and it impacts other industries is when you bring the team together, what are those moments, the human moments that matter, where that connection, where that authenticity can take place. So I think that's fascinating that you see it in a number of different places. Going into college, I know you went to University of Michigan. If I was to pull you aside freshman year and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer to that question?
Engineer. The smartest people I know in the world are engineers. They're amazing. They create things. School was never particularly hard for me, good at math, musical brain. And I thought, okay, that seems like a logical path, but I really didn't know. And I try to make sure for my own kids, I don't push them too much down a path because who really knows as a 17-year-old kid? I always hung out with a reasonably smart group of people, but diverse and distracted with sports and whatnot. And then I really discovered early on that it took a lot of patience. I wasn't born with a ton of patience, and you had a lot of precision. And there's a lot of deep, deep learning. And I was interested in broad macro learning, like how do the butterfly flapping its wings sort of thing. So I learned pretty quickly that exploring something that was a little bit less precise, something that was wrapped in ambiguity and evolution, a little bit more market psychology, history, where's the world going? If you build a bridge, the laws of nature don't change in the first month. If you build an investment portfolio, it can be challenged overnight. And so it felt to me like an environment where you can embrace ambiguity, try to learn quickly, and to either love or hate the environment where it's constantly changing on you every night. That's either enthralling because you see the newspaper. How does it change? What's the new optimal portfolio look like? Or that's crippling. And I was relatively better as I was learning in environments that are quickly changing. So I was like, just competitively, I enjoy it. And it's a constant learning. And I'm probably relatively more competitive in that space versus these geniuses who can outcompete me down to the detail level. So that was the early thinking from the college experience.
As you start to move through college years, I think it's really a formidable time for us in terms of whether it's social aspects, academic aspects. Are there two or three things you take from that period of your life and continue on with you into what you do today?
One is you're not really owed anything. Make the most of it. I was fortunate to have that opportunity. I don't come from a family with a whole lot of higher education accomplishments. So I had that and I needed to deliver upon it. And then what struck me was you also, in both the college and early career environment, you run into some people who started at a very different level. And it could come from a much more, this sounds negative, but entitled or taken for granted space. And that drove me, honestly. It drove me to say, I'll prove that I can start where I started and outpace and outwork. And whether that's good motivation or not, if I'm honest with myself, that competitive nature in me to say, can you succeed here? Pool just got a lot bigger. Here we go. Let's run. That fueled me for probably the middle 20 years of my life before you kind of wake up and said, geez, I've been running a long time. Where am I now?
Well, I think it's seasons where you have to be more competitive with others, with yourself. And then as you start to mature into your roles, and we talked about, it's less about what you're doing, it's what you're getting done through others. So the whole skill set that makes you a successful individual contributor and star performer, that shifts in management. That's almost a completely different playbook that you have to pull from. So I don't think that's a negative thing that you have that fire in the belly. I'd rather have leaders who have that than those who don't, because you can modulate that and you can help people be more collaborative versus someone who's not going to be as competitive or have that fire.
I think that's right. That's how I'm wired. But you ultimately making that leap, understanding that difference is critical. All the way back to my early years, I was in an environment where you're learning from a lot of family members and they, people like to talk, interact. And so I think that tempered that competitive side a little bit where you're also learning from an environment. I was fortunate to have intelligent friends and try to learn from them. But ultimately, it's about making the most of the ecosystem and embracing the people you're with, learning from them. For me, did I learn something today? Otherwise, it would be work.
That's something I really admire about you, Matt, as a CEO and senior leader at learning orientation, lifelong learning, learning agility. That's something since we early started working together, me sending you books and you reading them cover to cover and then coming back and wanting to discuss what you read, being able to apply the learnings. I think that's been a real pleasure for me as a coach to see you have some really tough conversations and us work through issues. And then you go apply it and then you come back and then we tweak it. I don't often see a lot of senior executives put in that work in between the sessions or putting that work on themselves to really get better. And that shows your strong learning orientation.
I think that's part of the answer to the AI revolution. And you hear this more and more. You see it in corporations and all across businesses. The idea that you have a certificate or a degree or a designation. When I took the CFA, like, I'm a CFA. All right, congrats. That means you get the privilege of working today. The idea that you show up and you're credentialized, and so you're paid for your credential. I think that's a notion that was much more relevant 50, 70 years ago. In today's world, the technology will compete you out. It's just how I'm wired because I love learning and I've been paid to learn about the world and about people. But I actually think it's a key skill set in the forward look because AI technology inherently is pulling upon a repository of human intelligence, which is incredibly powerful. But I would postulate that correlations to the past are going to be less useful in the forward look. They'll be useful, but ultimately humans are going to write the next chapter. And your ability to learn is going to outthink the machine because the future is different than the current. And ultimately, AI is algorithms about what if humans thought in the past, put into math. So you can outthink it if you're willing to outlearn it. And that to me is the exciting part of both school and my entire career, honestly.
Let's jump into early career. What was your first job out of school? What were those first couple of years like professionally?
Yeah. So I had an investment job. I've been in investments my entire life. As I mentioned, I thought I'd be an engineer. I ended up with a business degree from University of Michigan. I interviewed, and it's kind of one of these, all right, well, I'm on an investment track, and who knows that you want to get a few different job offers. And you don't know then that you're looking for fit. You're looking for offers. Like, how many offers can I get? But what you really should be looking for is fit, but you don't know that yet. And I had two key offers that I was between. One that had meant going to Chicago, which from the upper Midwest made a ton of sense, would have worked for a bank. It was a pretty well-defined role. The other was working for the investment division of an insurance company, managing bond portfolios, which, I don't know, like bank guy here, bond guy there. But I just like one hiring manager better than the other. I'm like, I'd rather work for X versus Y. Dave seems kind of nice and he's going to invest in me. It was a little bit less of an obvious career choice, but it was because of the people. And I just had this sense that I wasn't going into a program. I was going into a team. I knew the team member willing to invest in me. And that was basically why I made that call. And so I moved to Indiana from Michigan, spent the first 7 years of my career there as an analyst and then as a private credit analyst. And then really just looking to learn and saying, hey, what about this? Asking questions. And then taking on more responsibility within roles just because I was interested to learn. And I was very fortunate to be in an environment with people who trusted me, gave me enough rope to hang myself and let me grow. I wasn't contained by any boss who was like, no, your job is this. They were looking for young talent. For me, that worked. It's not like I was in a pool of 100 and hey, go figure it out. And I was just allowed to roam for a few years. It was great.
Yeah. So I love things. I want to start first. You trusted your gut in terms of the relationship and what you would learn from one manager versus the other. You see a lot of kids come out of school, they just want the job that's going to pay six figures, or the McKinseys, the Bains of the world. What did that start to teach you about trusting your gut and intuition when it comes to people and relationships?
It's funny because you don't know that it's trusting your gut until you don't trust your gut. It's just more natural instinct. Back to the kind of the family environment, the diversity of people. Who do I want to interact with? So it did feel natural. It felt easy. I was still challenged. And maybe that was actually in some ways not a big enough risk because I didn't take a different path. It was just felt instinctual where I think I can trust these people. So at that time, I almost didn't know what I didn't know. But then you begin to learn pretty quickly as you see other companies and you interact with other businesses and peers in the industry. And honestly, that's something that I probably under-indexed on early in my career. I was not born the most natural networker. I was more of a research wonk, just go out, work the problem. And other people would get just as far as me or further from amazing connectivity. And I began to realize that a little too late in my first stint of the career. Hey, these connections matter and that you could actually learn a lot from them. It wasn't just, why do I got to make these connections? Because you can learn about the industry. You can learn about opportunities. You can hear different opinions, just like back in school. Your competitors, often you can learn just as much from. And so that was probably 4 to 5 years into my job where I was finally like, wait, embrace this. That was a moment where I think I had that first reflection beyond just go out, work it, just be smarter. It was hey, I need to evolve a little bit and figure out how to navigate this industry. And then you see businesses do just certain things and then suddenly a network matters.
That's a great lesson, I think, to learn at that point in your career, Matt. Do you have any advice for leaders who get to an officer level, they move up into enterprise leadership, and you have to build that network where maybe you've let your work speak for itself for so long, and now that's just half the...
Yeah, you're 100% right. And that's how I'm wired. And I'm getting better at that. Hey, I'll just outwork the problem. There it is. There's the answer. And when you're a portfolio manager, that can work. But as you get further and further up in the business, it does become, that's great, but can you bring the board along with you? So I think when you can begin to realize that the two aren't mutually exclusive. And there was some good advice I was given very late in my career to where I actually had said, well, I prefer for my work to speak for itself. And the feedback was, well, you're in a position where people are going to have opinions of you. You'll have a brand and you can either manage that brand or someone will manage it for you. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. That's kind of interesting. I'd prefer to live in a world my actions spoke for themselves. And so it begins to matter. And I learned it, to move from my first job to my second, it was all connections. And there's plenty of people who are smart, but do they know you, trust you? Do they have a mutual friend that can say, I've talked to this person, you should meet them? And it never goes away.
You raise another good point about leadership. Was there an inflection point, Matt, where you realized people were looking to you for your leadership, maybe in an early manager role, portfolio manager, another role where you knew people were counting on you to be that leader?
So the second major role I was in for the second 7 years of my career, I had taken a leap of faith, took a bet on myself and made a move and took a job in London and got married before that to go to London and worked there for 4 years, had our first son there. And I was the bridge. I was the expat between this company and the international division. So while I was not in an extremely senior position, I was in a very influential position that I was trying to help expand internationally across time zones and cultures and working processes. And that was an interesting position because I wasn't always the boss. I was the influential link point. That began really to say more of there's a leadership element here. Even if you're hiring a team of analysts and that's the leader role, but the bigger leader role was both doing that, but also understanding how I was pinning together two different parts of a reporting structure with people more senior than me. So the influence component, which I think is more typically beyond second to you have leadership responsibilities as a manager, then influence without authority sort of concepts. I actually had some more influence without authority first from how do you build this? And that exposed me to the idea of understanding as a leader, it's not just do well in my job. And this is where I missed in my early career. It's understand the corporate vision, the strategy. And ultimately, if you can really be involved, understand the client value prop. And then your job becomes very clear to where, how do I help the client win? And if you're helping the client win as a part of a business, you'll be valued. But often people in their individual contributor roles can't see that, and nor can I. And as soon as you become a leader, you begin to see that. And that's where it really started to tie together to me. But it was more through influence, actually, than it was reporting line structures.
Another layer that comes into that is cross-cultural factors. Was that the biggest career move, boldest move you made up until that point, was to take that leap of faith and go over there?
No doubt. I kind of knew I needed to make a move. There's a corporate acquisition happening and I was going to move one way or another. And I was like, well, let's do this. It's time for a pivot. And I received some good advice from people in the industry that I'd work with. And I'd also seen that sometimes bad things can happen to good people. Just working harder when there's an acquisition here, or it's like, holy cow, this person was great and they're no longer there. Yeah, because there's volatility that you can't control. So I learned that lesson of manage your career or someone will manage it for you. And it's like, okay, let's take a bet on me. And I think that's really important. People should bet on themselves early. It gets harder late. And that was the biggest leap I took. I made another big leap after that. But I think as a person and as a professional, it was one of the biggest growth moments ever. I'd advise anyone possible to live outside your own culture. Not that the US and the UK is the biggest stretch, but it gives you also international travel, exposure to broader regions of Asia with clients or Europe with clients. And importantly, being able to read newspapers that talk about your country from outside your country or your subcultures actually helps you understand who you are better. So that was a big deal for me professionally. The break away from that kid in a middle-class family in Detroit, kind of, I don't want the pool to be so big. Bam, here you are in the London Financial Center. Let's go.
So another piece that you talked about is taking control of your career. I knew 17, 18 years old that I wanted to be a consultant and live in New York City. I had no idea what that meant at the time, but I had that vision. I remember even my first year of graduate school, sitting around with some friends one night and saying, I'm going to start a firm and I'm going to write some books. And they're all looking at me like I'm crazy. Didn't know they would play out the way that it had, but that vision, putting it to paper and having that idea back then was important. Did you always have an idea that you'd be a CEO, be in the C-suite? When did you start to realize that, you know what? I'm able to start navigating the network piece. The hard work is there. You start to build these pieces together and realize, wow, I am unique in terms of what I bring to the table.
So I knew I was a little unique in what I brought to the table in late high school to early college because I approached the world a little differently than my friends who are much smarter than me or my friends that are just more creative than me, that I was a bit of a blend. And that blend became then don't go fight against one or the other. Find an area where it took a blend of interpersonal skills, creativity, mathematical grit. But the short answer is no. I never scoped my career, I'll be very honest here, in the belief of I'll be the CIO, let alone CEO of a business this size. I always was of the belief that this is really being honest and open here, those jobs looked impossible to me. How incredible must those people be to have control of all those details on a day-to-day basis? The subject matter expertise must be unbelievable. So I viewed that as unattainable because I could never possibly have that level of command control over that broad a purview. And that's where, as I grew, and only as I began to grow, as a wait a minute, I can not just leading teams that are doing the same thing, but teams that are doing broader things. You begin to think, wait a minute, these jobs are attainable because it takes a different skill set, like actually be a leader versus do everything. And so I was very content in the idea that I'd be a senior research, the senior portfolio manager, leader of teams, ceiling of CIO. But I'll be honest, Adam, I never felt that I needed it. My background, my upbringing didn't require me to achieve any more than I had already achieved. And so the need or the drive to get to where I've gotten to has been more honestly out of learning. Let's learn how this works and I can add value and I want to deliver for our customers and I want to do it with the teams that we bring together. And that's what got me here was the wait, I can do it with the different skill sets. But originally, to me, it seemed unachievable because I had no idea what the skill set would be to do it. It seemed like it was just way too much work. And selfishly, when would I golf?
That's right.
But you find that balance.
So the other big part of that beyond influence of that authority is learning how to navigate difficult relationships, conflict management. We've talked about this a little bit. I'm working on my third book right now that looks at how relationally intelligent leaders can navigate difficult colleagues that they cross paths with. I have found in doing this work now for over 20 years, there are probably 10 or 12 archetypes: the narcissist, the passive aggressive, the people pleaser, the micromanager that you will come across. Maybe share with me a story or two of some of these characters you've crossed paths with, how you navigated it, where, these are people that didn't report to you, they didn't have to listen to you, but you still have to get things done for the enterprise.
This is something that over the last 10 to 15 years of my career I've been focused on. And this gets to the culture, by the way, of organizations and how do different personality types thrive or not thrive in a different culture where the norms are set by leaders, which we can get to separately because leaders do set these norms. But I think the biggest realization I had, and again, all the way back to my childhood, I grew up around a very diverse group of people. So the ability to interact in different crowds while being authentic, which is to me critical as a leader, being authentic, but being flexible and knowing how those two aren't in conflict with each other.
So how would you define authenticity, Matt? What does that mean to you? It means different things to different leaders.
To me, it's to where I come in and I believe my brand and who I am as a human will show, and that it's not me saying something I don't believe because it's a company line. I have no problem with public presenting if I believe the topic for as many people as possible. If I feel like, wait a minute, I don't really believe this, I believe it can show. I don't believe I'm a great actor, but if I believe it, I'm okay being proven wrong. But that to me is key to where if you need to deliver a tough message, I have to believe why it's the right tough message and say, authentically, here's my belief. You can challenge me. So that to me, sometimes in a big environment, you have to give a tough message and you can't give all the details. You still have to be authentic. And I think you can tell when people aren't, when they're telling a message they don't fully buy into. So that's what it means for me, that in a one-on-one, people wouldn't call BS on me. But with the different personality types, the biggest leap that I made then was probably a decade ago, was truly understanding that these aren't bad people if they're different than you or I. It's that they look at the world through a different lens. And we use Enneagrams inside a company currently. There's a lot of different personality factor tools you can use. But I found that incredibly helpful to say, this is a person who approaches from a top-down orientation, or this is a person who approaches bottom-up. So let's not start with the details. You're going to get into traps. So, but understanding that that person isn't good or bad, but is different. And then how do you, as a leader, help them be successful in the environment was a big leap for me. So very motivated people, I'll give you an example, who are overachievers, they're going to get to success. It's just they might have a raised earth behind them. So each individual personality type, you try to manage, it takes time, it takes investment. But that was the epiphany for me. They're not bad. They're just different.
Is that one of the biggest things that's really unlocked your success as a CEO early on, that you've invested in these relationships, you know the talent and skills of your people, like you've put in that work to get to that place where you can understand top down, bottom up, so that you can work with them to get the best out of them? Is that something that has evolved naturally? Was there an inflection point when you realized if I put the investment there, it's going to pay bigger returns down the road.
Early in my career, I was terrible at it. Honestly, had the assumption that good, hardworking, honest people would see eye to eye. And so, hey, there's a disagreement, put them in the room, and then you watch stuff blow up. It's like, oh, that didn't go so well. But look, I think you build a team and a culture that helps. It's not so much my evolution as a leader, so much as making sure the entire culture, the process, the HR components are helping you, identifying and having your leaders embrace this idea of how do strong teams come together? And so, as you know, even when hiring, and this was a big, big deal in moving into the CEO role, I wanted to make the team my own. And all-star teams aren't often the best teams. It's how does that team come together and what are the archetypes that you're looking to balance? If you don't have enough pushers or enough takers and enough coalescers, you want that balance. And the HR teams, you, others help through that. But it's really that portfolio approach. And my bias, given how I'm wired, is I'd always rather have to bridle or control a team than push a team. Both are challenging, but I tend to miss towards let's get a bunch of doers. And then it's my job to help define success for them, which brings up one other big issue. I don't want to overexpand on your question, but their personality type is one thing to understand. Their motivation is a whole nother thing. And it took me way too long in my career to understand that people aren't always motivated the same way I am. Understanding someone's motivation along with their personality type really then begins as a leader to put you in a position to help them win because you can define things that are achievable.
We touched on culture a couple of times. I want to spend a little time there, Matt. Your unique situation, you were backfilling a leader who was relatively beloved by the organization, been there for a long time. Performance for the business unit was not doing that well last couple of years. So you had an opportunity to come in and change things very quickly or move a lot of chairs around on the boat. You chose a different approach. Talk to me a little bit about how you viewed culture in that first year, the things that you needed to lift, the things that you wanted to evolve over time, because there's a lot of hard work you put in it.
Yeah. And kudos to those who I followed who focused more intentionally on culture than I would have known to at that point. But then as a leader, one of the things that I was coached and understood going in, don't take the culture for granted. The leader is going to help set the culture very quickly. And people are going to look to me as okay, how's this going to differ? And it's easy to assume, look, well, culture is just the water you're swimming in. It's just the water in the pool. It's like, no. You decide, is it salt? Is it chlorine? What's the temperature? And so one is to be really, really intentional you have to state it. Here's what I believe, as opposed to let it evolve. Because then what happens is people create their own narrative. So to a certain extent, it's harnessing the understanding that our business talks about culture a lot. And it's saying, this is what it is. And here's the direction of travel. You can't prescribe culture. You can say, I really want to emphasize these elements of culture because I don't believe culture is something that you stand at a podium and say, here's what's going to happen. Culture is a set of intentional actions taken by leaders to encode what's viewed as appropriate within a working group, in my opinion. I had a clear desire to make sure that we had a higher accountability culture where a culture of collaboration is something that I fully believe in, particularly in investment processes, where the more insights you can have, the higher your information ratio, Sharpe ratio, risk-adjusted returns all improve. In a business culture, you also have to have clear lines of accountability and decision rights. And those two can be at odds with each other at times. So my desire was to say, we're not going to stop working together. We're just going to be very clear on accountability and decision rights as we do it. And then the second stage is that people are going to fight over the armrest in the middle seat of that airplane. They're going to be like, that was mine. It's like, well, 3-hour flight, buddy, here we go. And so you had to help them say, this is where we're going. This is what we're looking for. But importantly, here's the why. Here's why it's going to benefit the business, and let the leaders and the culture understand that path. And then understand there's positives and negatives that come from all cultures. That's what some of the most interesting findings I've had is really well-intentioned things can actually have bad outcomes at times too.
I found when it comes to culture too, the unspoken norms, the rules of engagement that can evolve over time, if you don't put that work in up front, is what can really go on a culture and take it down a dark path if there aren't some kind of guidelines that are there. But the other piece that I see often too is CEO, the C-suite, you have to model those behaviors. Whatever you put in the culture credo, whatever you're saying, this is the way we want to operate as an organization. If you're not walking that talk, you go C-1, C-2, the lower levels are never going to say this means anything beyond a script on a wall. So it's really important to model it as well.
So 100% agree. And that's back to that authenticity. You degrade authenticity immediately if you're preaching something and then demonstrating something else. Give you an example on the unintended consequences of culture. Culture collaboration sounds great, but at an extreme, it could mean people want to agree and not disagree. But they're going to find an element where to disagree. It might be at the water cooler, or it might be in a little side chat, but you want that constructive disagreement to feel safe in the meeting room. And so you have to be really careful that a good thing of let's work together doesn't turn into well, I don't want to be disagreeable, so I'll do it in a side chat over here. And it becomes a subculture. So there's always a balancing act. And the way that we're framing it currently, a couple things is the balance between truth and harmony. You can have a whole lot of harmony and not a lot of truth, and that can be dangerous. You can have too much truth and no harmony, that could be dangerous. That right balance in a culture of, wait a minute, I have a problem with this version of the truth here is meant to be sacrificed some level of harmony. And that's how we're trying to have an outward conversation about that right balance within the organization.
That's one of the other things I admire about you, Matt, is that, again, using that learning orientation and data to back up your points of view, you have no problem being declarative. You have no problem pushing back. That's something that comes naturally to you, or maybe it doesn't. Is that something you have to pick up over time, or this ability to have harmony and accountability?
So I view that as part of that research, constant learning process. As soon as you embrace that you're constantly learning, then you break yourself free of the belief that you already know the answer to everything, because there's so much more to know. So our understanding of the future world, I mean, this is all the way back to the AI conversation. Things change. So be careful how closely you hold your belief in the world as a leader. I think that helps set you free if you're willing to embrace that learning mentality.
Absolutely. So you've done a lot of amazing things over your career, Matt. I'd love to spend a little time on some of the big wins, the things that you're most proud of. Our conversations the last year or two, a lot of it might be this role and what you've done in it. Share with me an example or two of something that you were really proud of.
The leap post financial crisis was a big win for me. The whole world went through a reset. And it's so funny if you talk to people who are in 40, 50, 60, you kind of all went through these, financial crisis moment, or how about when the Twin Towers went down? How about the pandemic? It's a what happened to that key point in your life. So that was one of them, to where I was in the third company in my career, successful, leading a team, had done a lift out, a financial crisis hits, business plans go sideways, opportunity sets go sideways. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old or some such thing. Bought a house after returning from London. It's like, wow, I'm in deep. It is one of those, what's the right path for me? And it was coordinating with that network. It's what are the opportunities created by the uncertainty? And that was a big one for me to say, let's make a career pivot and let's make a move. And I moved my family and I've spent now the last 16 years with the same company and been very happy with how that's developed. That was a big one for me. But then beyond that, and we touched upon a little bit, it was when I took over the CEO role. And there's plenty of else that happens in between, but that pivot to where it's more of a leadership orientation, I can go play this role, was a big one. But the team I put in place as a CEO was a big deal for me, that I was able to internally work laterally with prior peers, bring in people from the outside, create key critical hires, work to make sure that portfolio of people isn't an all-star team, but is cohesive, and then work as hard as possible to get to the front of the wave of how can I possibly be a month ahead of that team so I can be putting them in the right position, the right meeting, the right strategic conversation with an external partner, whatever that may be, or in front of the board next quarter and in front of Wall Street next quarter. Getting to the front of that wave, there's a lot of ways to fail in that. And honestly, I would say that's the biggest win of my career, was going through what's always going to be that hard journey. But once you've done it, I think it maybe gets easier, but it's going to be hard no matter what.
I think another piece that really stood out to me as an external partner to the leaders at Voya was your succession pipeline was put in place 3-4 years ago. I mean, this was something that you were being groomed for, and there was an investment made. And so there were transitional points along that journey from CIO to CEO-elect to CEO, where the investment from the firm, the investment you put in, the investment from your manager, I think it made that transition a lot easier. You oftentimes will see no CEO succession plan in place, and someone gets hit by a bus or wins the lottery, and everyone's rushing around the 11th hour to try to figure it out. So I think that investment the company was willing to make in your future and their future paid off.
No doubt. And that goes all the way back to the coaching, the idea that you have to be aware that you're building new skill sets, right? And having that partner, those mentors to hold you accountable for it. A lot of this isn't rocket science. It's did you do the work before you came back to the next visit at the gym? Or is it clear that you can't lift any more weight? So there's accountability that helps. There's a guidance that helps. But ultimately, yeah, career planning, succession planning. Now, what's always interesting, succession plans are critical because they embed a lot of thought, but then they go down a path and they have other implications. And that's both the next hard part about that is, okay, I've done this, now what? And so I think a lot of leaders who take over the CEO role, it's get your own team, your own vision, strategy, and execution plan. And then as you do that, so let's say that takes 6 months to 12 months, how do you help your team do that? So I think there's this second wave effect, and we've gone through that you see that go through businesses as well. And that's equally as powerful to make sure that what's encoded from the new leadership team goes a level deeper. We like to think of that as you can have the right 10 who are leading the company, they empower the right 100, and then they empower the right 1,000. If you can win the 3 deep in the organization, you can maybe only control the first 10 within 6 months. You can really be powerful as you get that second and third wave through the organization.
Yeah. You've been in the role for how long now, Matt?
Just coming up on 2 years.
You look back at the early days. Is there anything you go back and do differently now, knowing what you know today?
In some ways, I'm not sure there is. I think it's almost going to be a machete through the thicket no matter what you do. That's the one thing that I would say. There's a couple that no, it's going to be a little chaotic. No, you're just going to have to fight your way through and overinvest. As you go down this path, everyone tells you take care of yourself at the same time. There's no masks. Your true self is going to show up and be authentic to that. And I think that that's really good advice. And the advice that I should have probably embraced a little earlier is make sure you plan and structure your personal life around it so that you are healthy and happy and balanced at the end. A CEO job is never going to feel perfectly balanced.
Yeah.
But as you go through that first 12 to 18 months, you can get to a point where, wait a minute, I've been sprinting for how long? And you need to replenish your batteries. And so realizing is you're so driven that it's not going to help anybody if you burn out too quickly. So I had some key points 6 months in and 12 months in where I took a break and took a breath. That I almost felt guilty about that when I did it. But if I hadn't, I don't know that I'd have been as useful for the organization. So that's the one thing everyone says, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. You have to be really intentional to do it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's something we've talked about over the last couple of years too. I don't think there's a work-life balance you have to strike for in a C-suite role, but it's knowing when to turn something on and turn something off. And when you can turn it off for 2 days, are you really off and recuperating and re-energizing before you go on to the next sprint? So that's a really important piece. I'm curious, Matt, with all the successes that you've had, if we look at setbacks or failures, what are some of the things you look at your career and you wish you would have done differently or they didn't turn out the way you would hope they would?
Yeah. So the hardest thing for me career wise is whenever you find yourself, and again, kind of wired towards it, just outwork a problem, right? Just if you tried rubbing more dirt on it, work harder. When you're not aligned with the strategic direction of a business, and I found myself in this position only a couple times in my career, but when you're not aligned to your boss or to the direction of the business or the direction the business changes, that gets hard because suddenly winning doesn't really matter. There's no way to win. For me, one of the desires to be more senior, to grow in my influence in the companies was that I wanted to make sure that I could be in a position to influence what the direction of travel is, what success looks like, and to have influence up, even when you're not in control, have influence up to me is very important if people are trying to guide their career to have influence so that the success of the company can be defined as aligned to their own success. Now, ideally, those two things are not in conflict, but when they are, and I've had that a couple of times in my career, I thought that was the hardest environment because no matter how much I learned, no matter how much I delivered for clients, no matter how much I inspired teams, it ultimately would be truncated. The road would end. And I struggle with that personally and from a stress standpoint. And then each of those actually led to me changing jobs. And it doesn't mean anyone is bad or a company or a strategy. It just so happened that my business line wasn't aligned with it. That to me was insurmountable. And I think that the advice is to fight to get that alignment, try to influence and change it. And if you can't, life's too short to stay there. Go find greener pasture.
Yeah. Well, they say people don't quit jobs, they quit their bosses. So that's a big piece there. The other piece that I think is often not talked about are the politics that can take place in the C-suite, the spheres of influence, who's been in the C-suite the longest, who's has the institutional knowledge. Well, what are your thoughts on the political side of it, how you navigate being new to a C-suite, being the most seasoned person in the room, as you start to evolve? And I think you're in this place now a couple of years in, you're now becoming the statesman in the room. You're now getting people to listen to your input. So how do you navigate the politics piece of things?
Some of it is knowing how long the shot clock is. And so do you have to have immediate victories and making sure you can blend in some immediate victories, knowing where you have advocates and where you have skeptics in the room, because you're going to have both. And you're going to have people who are supportive, but maybe undermining. And this is true in any job. But getting to that next level understanding of the actors, where it's not a board, it's an array of board members, and it's not a leadership team. And then having that personal relationship and asking for alignment. How are we working together? How can I be a better partner to you?
Sometimes just asking how can we better serve each other and having the humility to ask that versus dictating to others.
I believe so. I really do. And then ultimately, as you're doing that, you've had to have won your boss, and you've had to have won your boss's boss or the board. Now, you don't have to have a full victory, but I think at every level in my career, Adam, the best thing you could have early is the benefit of the doubt. So you go in, you gain the benefit of the doubt, you do something that is clearly maybe not in your own best interest, but in the best interest of the group. You show alignment. You show you're not there for yourself. Sometimes people forget, no matter how senior your role is, it doesn't mean you control more. It means you're responsible for more. And so you have to inspire down. And you also have to make sure that those who are entrusted you, you're going to make them successful, that the board sees you as empowering their view. And so you're always in service of. And I think that's a mistake that some people make in senior roles. I'm not the big guy. Actually, no, you're still there in service of your client, just like you were yesterday. Whenever there's ambiguity, picture the client in the room. I like to picture the client in the room at all times. What does the client want us to be debating? What decision do they want us to be making so that they'll have the best outcome? That is a great way to diffuse an array of opinions that could be very well intentioned from different spokes, to where ultimately bring it back to where we are aligned, and we better darn well be aligned around the client. So those sort of reframing at both a client level and a how do we win together level, I found very effective. But look, you either get there or you don't, with the benefit of the doubt. And once you do, you're on the front of that wave.
That makes great sense. I want to switch gears, Mac, and talk a little bit about your leadership credo, leadership philosophy. You've had a great career journey. You've crossed paths with many different types of leaders. How do you define great leadership at this point?
Ultimately, great leadership is finding how to optimize both the person and the business, and being honest with where there's tension between both. And ultimately, as a leader, and I'm thinking about leader of people here. Now, leading a business is much more about vision and strategy. But when I think about leading individuals, and then those are individuals leading teams at a high level, I really like that idea of how do I understand the person? How do I understand the business, and where there's tension between the two? And I was not like this early in my career.
I was going to say, I don't know if you were like this when we met
No,
7, 8 years.
not at all.
I'm hopeful that I had some influence on that.
More than you might like to know. But, I woke up thinking, how do we win today for our client? You're all professionals. You're all well paid. I'm not here to babysit. How do we do today? And it was more of a, think of it as X and O's. How did the football team play last night? Not tight end had a good game, or the DB didn't, or whatever, as opposed to how are we going to get the business from here to here? And what does that mean for your career and how you develop? And I'm not perfect at this, Adam, by any stretch, but the mentality of, like, if I could try before every one-on-one that I have with my team, which is just a rolling conversation, to say, what do I think they want from me before this meeting starts? How can I make this person more successful? Because the sum of my direct report success is the only way I can win. As a leader, when I go into that conversation thinking I need something from them, I try to think, how can I help them be successful? What are they likely coming to me for? When I was in their seat, what would I want my leader to be doing? It's the message that I heard was that leadership as a gardener mentality, to where you're helping train the soil. I can't grow for the plant. I can't lock arms and run. But how do you cultivate that talent to where the business can grow with it? Helps that person succeed. That's what I think of great leadership.
A lot of the leaders at Voya are outliers in that regard. It's one of the things I admire about the culture so much, is that servant leadership is rare to find across different industries, especially investment management, private equity. The word servant leadership is not there. But I think, to your point, many leaders will go into those meetings. What are they going to do for me? What have they done for me lately? Versus how can I best serve them? How can I bring the best of their self to the work that they do? Has that always been natural for you? Did that come with a growth curve too, to make that flip and have that point change?
It came with the growth curve, and you helped me down that growth curve. It's a natural evolution, because when you're trying to win as a team, ultimately you're picking your teammates up along the way. Once you make the full leap to where, and this is for me, the full leap was I can't be successful without them. It's impossible. I managed money for the first 30 years of my career. Still will have screens with stock tickers up everywhere. And I think I shared this with you. After I got into the CIO and the CEO role, I actually printed out my org chart and I taped it to my screen. And people are like, what? You can't remember your direct reports? I'm like, no. That's my portfolio right there. Not all these flashing reds and yellows and stocks and bonds on the screen. My portfolio is these 8 people, and how do I put them in a position to win? So it's a evolution, but ultimately as a senior leader, that's where you get to. And then if you really think about it, it's what's the board, what's the external constituencies, and how do I bridge the gap between what do those constituencies want? So I do think it's a continuum. I didn't start there by any means, but I think getting there as soon as possible. Now, I will tell you, it's really easy to revert back in a moment of tension, or we got to deliver on something. Why didn't we do something? But trying to just remind yourself of that mentality helps.
I was in an offsite with a senior team a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about who's your first team. And a number of folks in the room said your first team are your peers on the C-suite. When you think about that, Matt, do you have a different point of view on that? Would you say the same thing? Like, who is your first team when you think about the different hats you wear at Voya?
It's a hard one. And so I'm a member of the overall C-suite, and ultimately accountability is both ways. It's to that team and it's to the investment management organization. I view those hopefully not being in conflict into where I am a member of 2 teams. Ultimately, you want to be able to run a business that what I oversee for Voya Investment Management is driving success at the higher level. So I think of that as my 1A, but it can flip because ultimately you wear multiple hats as an executive of the broader firm. They shouldn't be in conflict. And if they are, that's the conversation to have across the leadership team or the board. So they shouldn't be in conflict. Ultimately, those are decisions that I need to make. What you can't do as a leader is let that ambiguity seep in the organization. That's my job. And that's the senior executive's job. So I tend to fully think of it as 2 teams.
Yeah, makes good sense. I always get fascinated by this question: are leaders born or are they made?
I think they can be made. I think they can be made even better if they were born with a little bit of it. As always, there's a continuum in there.
Are there any factors? Would you say charisma, executive presence? Like, what's the nature piece that you think some people had, some people didn't?
So I think, and they tell you this, one of the tricks to understand that answer from a lot of intelligent people is what do they tell you to do more of when you get into the leadership role? And unambiguously, they tell you to do a couple things. Listen more, listen. Second, they say ask more questions. And so I'll literally, and for the first 3 months, I was walking around, ask more questions. So those are 2 things. And then communicate clearly. As a senior leader, you learn very quickly that there are very few casual conversations. What you say that you want everyone to hear, they don't until you say it 12 times. And what you say that's misconstrued travels like wildfire. So I think those are 3 things: active listening skill, ask more questions, and then clarity and communication to take away ambiguity and to try to be precise matters so much. Those are 3 things that I think can be learned, but you can't have a deficiency in them or you'll struggle.
Those are great points. And I think those are skills that can be acquired. It doesn't matter if you're an extrovert, introvert, or how your personality is wired. There are behaviors in each of those areas that you can learn and improve and refine. What do first-time C-suite people need to hear? What do you think is something going into that room for the first time they should know, need to know in order to be successful early on?
I think interpersonal relationships, relational intelligence becomes paramount. It really does at an individual level. Can you connect to people? And expectations are going to be high. They're going to expect that you're taking them into account. And if you're not coming prepared for that, you're going to struggle. I found a word to be very useful for me. And it's maybe not true in every situation, but I like the refounder mentality, the refound. Like the mentality of what if you had this job and then it was taken away from you, and then someone came in who didn't own anything from the past and just made it unbelievably successful. And what if you were to say, well, I could have done that, then why the heck didn't you? Right? So do you approach not encumbered, because so many CEOs come into the job from the company. Some come in from outside. But if you come from the company, doing yourself the benefit to saying, I don't own the past, I own the future, and adopting a refounder mentality frees you from so many legacy relationships or what got me here, what does it get me to the next level?
That takes a lot of courage to reimagine and redesign and charge forward.
100%, but it takes courage. It takes a willingness to lose. You need to be bold, but there's a tension between growth and comfort. And that's both personally and from a business standpoint. And when you're hired into this role, you're hired presumably to take it to the next level against a very competitive industry or to the next state of evolution. So I think the refounder mentality, while intimidating, Adam, can be free because you don't owe anything to history. You owe the future of the business. And I embrace that heavily every day.
How does that impact taking calculated risk? Where does that play into the mix in terms of how you lead as a CEO?
That then becomes, can you bring your team along with it? Because you're asking to refound and you're asking everyone to change seats and buy in, and then you could ask the board that as well. The way that I think about that is that goes to, is the vision different? Is the strategy different? Is the governance structure different? And so as soon as you go into a refounder mentality, you go into what does that mean for your people? And so you have to get them to buy in. And that's that 100-day, do you see it? And that's where the vision and the strategy matter. Because if it's just, I want to refound, what does that mean? That's great. We're going to run a different offense. What is it? I don't know, different. And so you're right. But I think all that does is set in motion. Let me put it this way. It reminds you as a CEO that you're responsible for all of it. It forces you to take an ownership mentality as opposed to I inherited something. Throw that away. What are you going to do with what you got?
That's right. And it gives you more ownership for that. I know you have a much longer career history ahead of you, so legacy is probably not something that's front and center for you at this point. But what do you want people to say about you when you're not in the room anymore? What is the impact you want to have had on others?
That's always a hard one, right? I've heard very wise people say, write your career tombstone now and then go make it happen.
Yep, great advice.
Which I like. I haven't done that yet. But what I'd like, authenticity matters a lot to me. I think I've said that word a good amount.
Do you think that word is thrown around too much the last couple of years? I see it time and time again. It comes up. It's a foundational element of my relational intelligence framework, so I understand it. But it's the reason why I asked the question earlier. Like, I think people have different definitions of it. And if you're not comfortable in your own skin, you can't really define what it is or how to show up with it. So I think that's a really critical piece. But what are your thoughts on that?
So my thought on that is it's part of a broader societal question of people know the absence of it, then they see the existence of it, which is actually not the cultural norm. People are usually very good at seeing something, but not the absence of something. There's so much media buzz, short-term trend following and influencers that
Propaganda.
the cotton candy effect of, I don't know, high on sugar versus is this really something you believe? No, it's trendy. Or how many times you have to say the word AI or XYZ buzzwords where people are coached to where they come across as supporting a flat, uninspiring vision of appropriateness. And I think in the broader culture, that's part of what this pushback against it, that doesn't feel authentic to. So I actually think the world can spot lack of authenticity more. And I probably live more in fear of being viewed as inauthentic than I care to be viewed as authentic. But to me, that's my honest truth, that I believe what I'm telling you and that it can be proven to be wrong, but I actually believe it. That matters a lot to me. So I would like to be viewed as someone who is authentic in service of their customers every day, and someone who understood that there was no conflict between the business being successful and the customers being successful. That's a symbiotic relationship. And it's senior leaders' job to bring those two together. That we're in service of our customers means we can be successful in business. And I think some people approach as almost how much can we get out of a customer or like if there's odds there. I really don't think that's true. Business serves customers. And if they do that, they're successful. That's what I'm trying to bring to the business as our North Star.
That's a great mindset. I've always looked at that just in my own career. I had one of my first mentors say early on, do good work, you get more work. And that's been a real philosophy of mine of not trying to go out and get the next coaching client, but if you do good work, the opportunities will present themselves. You will be positioned in the right way. I'm going to go through some rapid fire questions, but I just wanted to leave with one more question before we do that. We've invested a good hour and a half of time together today. What do you want people to walk away from this conversation?
Everyone's on their own career journey. You won't always have an end point. I didn't. I never charted where I'd get to, or I don't really understand where I'll go. But what guides me is a desire to learn, and then a desire and a willingness, because you know you're always learning, to take risks.
You never fail. You just learn and adjust and move forward.
Right. When you define success as overcoming the next uncertain thing, the new thing, it's harder to fail. When I really think about the stress in my career over the last 32 years, yeah, it was about making sure I took care of myself and my family. But it's also, I don't want to disappoint those who I'm trying to win with. There's people who are on your teams that have made life choices built around their career and families. And I want to help them achieve what they can achieve. I've achieved an awful lot more than I could have ever expected. I'm excited about the future. I don't want to truncate anyone else's dream by anything that I sub-optimize for them. That's what I think a lot about is it's almost a pay it forward mentality, but it's almost a obligation mentality.
That's one of my life quotes too, who much is given, much is required. And so there's that balance that you have there with that. So that makes great sense. Let's go through some rapid fire to wrap up. One word your team would say to describe your leadership style today.
Honest.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. One misconception people often have about you.
I'll share too, maybe reserved and unemotional. There's probably a lot more going on underneath that I'm trying not to show, but also, people are like, oh, you're a natural at that communication stuff. It's like, no, there's a lot of work that goes in. Not a natural at a whole lot. I just try to outwork things.
Yeah, that makes good sense. What's one thing you geek out on outside of work?
Boy, weather. I'm a weather nut. I find it fascinating. Everything on the History Channel, anything that Neil deGrasse Tyson's talking about in the universe that I don't really understand, but it's unbelievable. Chemistry and physics. I find that stuff amazing. I just don't have enough time.
So question down a rabbit hole. I don't want to get too distracted. Do you think with what you know about History Channel, the shows you watch, that there has been secret physics for about 50, 60 years that people don't know?
Yeah, I think there's deep understanding of things, although the quantum computing edge of the envelope right now and the building of energy creating machines are areas that I don't think has been hidden. That is really exciting about our future state.
Yeah, absolutely. First words that come to mind when you hear social media.
Sugar enraged hyenas.
That's good. That's good. How about first words when you hear the AI?
Backward looking. I'd say it's inherently backward looking, but I also think cyborg. I think incredibly powerful when paired with a human. A cyborg mentality as opposed to a bot mentality is what I think of when I think AI. How does a human use it as opposed to be replaced by it?
One mantra that you live by.
Steer your own ship. Make it your own. We're all born with a different set of skills, weaknesses, strengths, opportunities. I just hate people to wake up and say, I never took my shot. So whatever that shot is, however big, however small, make it your own.
That's really great advice. Well, Matt, this was great. I've come to appreciate our relationship over the years, just in terms of your candor and all the stuff you've spoken about today. I've seen that in our own relationship. So thank you for the time today. It was great speaking with you, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks for the relationship over many years.
One of the ways you can support this channel is to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This tremendously helps with the YouTube algorithms to get the Tales from the C-Suite podcast, broader exposure to leaders from all walks of life. I would greatly appreciate your help in supporting the growth of our channel. If you find our interviews insightful and helpful with your career, please encourage your friends and colleagues to also listen to our episodes and subscribe, like, and comment on the videos.